Welcome back to the Betsperts Golf DFS Show. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today as a duo, not a trio, by none other than the sports betting manager here at Betsperts and 4for4 Football, also the host of the Move the Line NFL Betting Podcast, back every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. It is none other than friend in life, Ryan Noonan. Noonan, how's everything going on that end?
It's going well, buddy. We were talking before we got started here. I feel like this is a better watch, especially on Sunday. You can get into like the alternate shots. Team format here that we have is a little bit different. It is a tough DFS slate. Hopefully we can have some actionable takeaways here because this is, I like the wrinkles, breaking up the monotony of the in-season stroke play stuff that we grind on. I wish it was a little further down the road because we just had a wrinkle not too long ago with match play, but here we are. And, it's an interesting event.
Especially tough after a riveting finish at Harbor Links, where it came down to Spieth having a miraculous final day, as we've seen Spieth do from time to time. But also because this is truly a week for degenerates. Whether you bet or play DFS, I bet the field will, for better or worse, be less rostered, be less impactful, be fewer players wanting to jump in on DFS since there is a lot going on. And that's why I want to get right into it, because we begin this journey at TPC Louisiana, which, keep in mind, is also a lengthy course and featuring 4 par 4s of at least 470 yards and all par 3s being over 200 yards. Beyond that, though, as I mentioned, for DFS specifically, interesting because we have a massive 160-player field comprised of 82-man teams that entail 2 days, Thursday and Saturday, of 4-ball play, where every golfer plays their own ball and the team then takes the highest score of the 2 on that hole. And then 2 days, Friday and Sunday, where teammates alternate shots and take whatever they finish with, which is also why teammates are priced the same in DFS on DraftKings in particular, and you are not permitted to play both according to site rules. It'll just tell you cannot lock this lineup. So what do you think of first whenever you start building lineups for this particular format?
Yeah, it's tough. You can't get cute. Like, you can't pick Ryan Palmer and think you're getting Scotty Scheffler for cheap because you're just getting the same. It's like cumulative ownership. So, yeah, I mean, so there's a few things, right? So there's the team format. And as you mentioned, like the best ball and alternate shot situation here too. We also have no shot link data. And we have another Pete Dye track. I believe this is like 3 and 6 weeks. And typically the format, like the way that these Pete Dye tracks play and his design, especially off the tee and the way he wants to visualize or have you visualize the shots, it kind of brings the entire field together. There's a lot of forced layups, even though it is lengthier than like last week, Pete Dye track at Harbortown. So it is just, it's one of those events that is probably more narrative based. Like, you can tell yourself stories when trying to pick through the player pool. Are these guys familiar with each other? Do they have any relationships? Are there, college stories that we don't know about? We've uncovered some of those already today. It is definitely a thing where you can get really cute trying to pair skill sets. We're like, okay, well, this guy's great off the tee and this guy's great on approach, and they could just get, flipped together. And all of a sudden you're not even benefiting from what you thought was a great matching and pairing because the guy who's not good off the tee is driving the ball sometimes, and the guy who's not as strong with the approach game is, set to hit that second shot. So I wouldn't get too cute trying to retrofit those things because the guys can get flipped really quickly. It's just finding some narratives, some values, looking at ownership that you think can make sense. It's definitely less of a analytical, data-driven week, and it is definitely more of probably a game theory ownership. Because to your point, there's not going to be a lot of casuals in the lobby this week because it's just not a aesthetically pleasing week that we are typically used to.
That's what my DFS brain did at first as well, was think about, well, even if we think this is the winning team, what if I can get Ryan Palmer rostered lower than Scotty Scheffler? But as you already pointed out, doesn't matter. It's cumulative ownership. It doesn't change. So that already takes a intricate thought process out of it. I'm wondering, because after I dove deep, I'm curious if this means anything to you, since after looking at the results of last year's biggest tournament in this format, 200K to first on DraftKings, not only did the average salary for teams finishing in the top 10 average out to 9,600. So that affords you basically one team 67 to 7K, and then basically you're spending up high eights all the way, maybe one over significantly in the 10K range. But the ownership, despite that average salary of 9,600, the average ownership of every golfer came out to 11.8%. So basically, low rostered teams and players in the 8Ks that are considered long shots, but basically just went away from the rest of the field. Does any of that mean anything to you? Like, is this something that we should be playing outrights and longer shot golfers, knowing that it's team play and anything can happen?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's part of the nature of this event too, and the PDI courses in general, is that it does bring the field together a little bit more than, even last week's a little bit different. Well, it was a shorter course, so that was easier to profile ball striking, and it's so narrow. You can have different sight lines that matter, but like TPC Sawgrass, like for the players, is a perfect example. There's another PDI track that's of similar length, and because of the way that it's laid out, it takes away some of the driving distance, guys that you like to look at, bombers or things like that, like really brings in any skill set. So yeah, I mean, part of it, JD, is that we just want to avoid the sixes. I mean, we talked about it beforehand, like trying to spend up, and there are a few teams up there that make a ton of sense. Like if I'm going to hit 2 and even really hit 1 above 10K, it's going to put me down into a tier that's very uncomfortable trying to find, birdie makers here, right? You need to be able to take advantage of guys, especially when you're playing best ball. There's a strategy with the pairings that is different than a unique event too, right? If I know that you are up on the tee first and you strike one and you're in the fairway, but I'm longer off the tee and I want to push it a little bit, I can go for it because I know that we're already as a team pretty safe because you're in the fairway. So if we maybe have a birdie opportunity, we can, worst case scenario, get out of here with a par. But that adds a different element too. That's really, really hard, especially if first round leader. It's more of a betting thing. But again, there's so many different strategies here with the way that the best ball and alternate shot can work.
Let's get right into it then, because the elite tier is fairly simple. The elite tier is the only 4 teams on DraftKings that are priced over 10K. That is the team of Colin Morikawa and Victor Hovland, Alexander Schauffele and Patrick Cantlay, who you mentioned avoiding sixes, but are so good that last year at this event shot a 74 on Friday, 2 over par, and still not only made the cut, but finished T11. Cam Smith and Mark Leishman, and Billy Horschel and Sam Burns. So do you want to spend up for any of these? Do your lineup building start with any of these teams, or are you looking elsewhere?
My guess is that the Horschel Burns team is probably the most popular. When we get a first look at ownership, they are, well, first of all, I don't know. First of all, Burns is from the area. Horschel's a bulldog. So I don't think that they're going on they're just going down there to play and hang out and, spend some time together. They're going to win. They want to do this together. They got close last year. I think that there's some, skill sets. Horschel's playing better than he was last year. Burns is an ascending player, kind of turned the corner right around this time last year. So I think that that's probably the most ownership. Theoretically, you would love to get up to the Morikawa Hovland team, but again, it's going to force you to make some decisions and click some names that you really don't want to down the board. So even that savings of a couple $100, I think makes the most sense. Cam Smith, we saw some sporadic golf last week. Again, they won this last year. Maybe they want to defend, which I'm sure they do. But I think in that group by far, and it's my favorite play in the group, would be Horschel Burns. It just becomes, is it really problematic to click it? Because if it's upwards north of, say upper teens and 20, it's a little hard to do.
That's already interesting because I thought Horschel Burns would be the lowest rostered among the 4, and people would instead pay up for the team of Morikawa and Hovland or Schauffele and Cantlay. Especially because when you look at any model, Morikawa and Hovland grade out pretty well in having a great mesh in their team and what they do best and their weaknesses together. I also personally, as you mentioned, like Cam Smith and Mark Leishman, just like Rory and Masters DFS, as we talked about. It is a terrific spot after not 2 poor weeks necessarily, but 2 weeks in which Cam Smith didn't live up to the hype really on the final day. It seems like another great spot to just roster Cam Smith in hopes that everyone just rides his Sunday at RPC and instead fades him for that reason. Mark Leishman also great off the tee mesh as well with Cam Smith's most recent approach shots and tee to green stats. So overall, yeah, I like that pairing the most, but admittedly, I think I'm personally going to live in the middle tier, the next tier. And that's kind of where I start in just fading anything over 10K personally.
Yeah, I understand that too. I do agree with you that the Cam Smith, Mark Leishman is probably the lowest owned of that 10K group, partially because, like you said, the Cam Smith thing, like what we saw last week, how we can get sporadic at times. Again, questioning motivation. Like we just don't have a lot this week that's that could be as data driven. Like they won it last year, or they just kind of going through the motions, are they here to defend? I think that they're probably going to be the lowest owned of the group for sure.
Moving on, though, there's a lot to talk about in this middle tier because Scotty Scheffler and Ryan Palmer, of course, at the top. I think Shane Lowry and Ian Poulter is a great combination, but also, given that we actually do expect them to compete, I think they will be fairly popular, at least over expectations. I've already seen a lot of people, and we'll get into the reasons why here after I'm done listening to them, but we've already seen a lot of people talk about Sergio Garcia and Tommy Fleetwood as major contenders in this format. I believe Will Zalatoris and Davis Riley will be one of the most popular teams to roster in DFS. And then some others, just like the Georgia Bulldog connection between Sepp Straka and Grayson Sigg and Grant McDowell and Seamus Power down at 8,600. Those seem to all be popping right now. So let's go ahead and start at the top for you. What's the first team that comes to mind in this range?
Yeah, my favorite team here is the Chilean mix here with Niemann and Mito. I mean, I think that's, they're young kids that are, I think, definitely motivated. Would love for them to get Mito to get his, first win. I like the form was on both of them at RBC Heritage last week, and they both performed pretty well. Not a great close, but again, both T30. So I think that they were very much in play here. Decent price, not very prohibitive at 9,200. I think you make a good call on the Sergio and Fleetwood number. Pretty alarming how short their number is in the betting markets, which is a little bit telling. Sergio just had been like a ball striking wizard, couldn't make a putt for a solid 2 years, but just was tee to green elite and lost a little bit. But last time out at the Masters, was dialed in. I think he gained 7 strokes on approach at the Masters. And Fleetwood has been basically an auto T20 for the last 6 stroke play events. He is T20. So it's not a huge birdie making duo. They can also just grind out the pars too. If they can get hot and get the putter running a little bit hot with Sergio, they're very much in play here. Just interested to see where the ownership is on that group. Same thing for Bubba and Harold Varner. That is probably feels like one of the most volatile groups. But again, if we can get any putting from that duo with HV3's current form, Bubba could be, again, he likes his team events, has had a couple of T10s here. Varner had some success here as a solo. So I think that team's pretty interesting too.
So do you think the fact that Varner, as you mentioned, has some success here, but also has missed the last 4 cuts in team play at the Zurich Classic, do you think that will depress their ownership? And then if so, given the volatility, as you mentioned, is that worth rostering them? Because I keep coming back to the fact that, yes, Varner did miss the last 4 cuts, but then also he, as you mentioned as well, he's playing well, but also it just seems like, and I don't have data to back this up, but it seems like Bubba would be a extremely hard teammate to pair with, given that he just paints every course as a canvas. Like his creativity is what flourishes. And him being the one that sets up a Varner approach shot doesn't seem necessarily ideal.
Yeah, I get that mindset. I also think that Bubba seems like a genuinely really good guy, and HV3 is coming off of kind of a rough weekend.
Oh, remember was it Saudi or Abu Dhabi whenever Varner made that eagle puck to win and Bubba came all the way back from the locker room just to hug him, and Bubba was the one who had the lead before then. Yeah,
and they played really well together. They play actually against each other in the match play in Austin, and you could just kind of tell too that there's some camaraderie there. It didn't feel as maybe as intense as some of the other matchups there too. So there definitely is a relationship. They'll both be rocking the Jordans, which you'd love to see. I don't know. I get it, but also at the same time, I feel like if you needed some guy, Monday to Wednesday to kind of get you back in the right mind, frame of mind after HV3 kind of lost it a little bit on Sunday there, I think that Bubba would be the right guy for that. I get it too. The shot shaping, he's notorious for the way he likes to move the ball. You don't have to move the ball like Bubba does. Theoretically, he's going to, shape a shot and leave himself hopefully in the fairway. He just kind of sees it in a different way than everyone else does.
My favorite when I start is, as you mentioned, Garcia and Fleetwood. Fleetwood gained at least 1.4 strokes around the green and has been in the positives in putting in 6 of his last 7 rounds. And Sergio, of course, 6.8 strokes exactly on approach shots at the Masters, even though he wasn't on negatives on approach. in his 5 rounds prior. But I tend to believe that the stat that regresses, also, you have to go all the way back to the 2010s to find a stretch where Sergio lost strokes on approach in 5 consecutive rounds. So
Jeez.
I really like this duo. I already have an outright ticket on them actually as well.
Nice.
And then second for me, sell me against the idea of Lowry and Poulter, who I understand we usually wouldn't play given Poulter's recent performance and just play right now in this calendar year. But as a team, 1.4 strokes gained per round in their past 24 events. And I think it is one of those connections that mesh well, and that the way Lowry's been playing the past couple rounds especially made noise both at the Masters and RBC. And then given Poulter's putting, since that's where Lowry has struggled historically, especially this year, I think they actually mesh really well together here.
Yeah, so that's the thing I was trying to touch on at the top, because if they get out of sync, though, then you're in a little bit of a problem, because Poulter has been struggling a little bit, especially tee to green. And then you mentioned Lowry's putting struggles has kind of been the only thing that's kept him out of the winner's circle on Sunday. So, yeah, I mean, if they can stay theoretically on script from like, whose turn it is, on the certain holes. Yeah, I mean, they're a nice build. Similar situation there too. I think it's a nice relationship. Again, Ryder Cup teammates, playing, on the Euro events for years together. There's a good relationship there too. And we really want to default to those things this week, I think, versus the guys that have been, paired up because of, there's no one left, or there's an agent relationship. You'd rather have the guys that, picked each other and are going together. So that's for the most part what's happening at the top tier anyway. So that's not necessarily anything to, separate each other up here. The one thing we have to talk about is Scottie Scheffler and Ryan Palmer, because it's going to feel so obvious if we don't address Scheffler. And then we have this situation with Ryan Palmer, who is either the most amazing hang ever, or has found some way to like wet the whistle of some of these guys to get like young Spieth when he was top 5 in the world, Rahm, and then Scotty, who is just on an absolute heater. Like, something's going on with Ryan Palmer. Again, the others,
you can say Texas connection. That's easy. But
that
the Rahm one, I don't, unless he's just like a good friend, I don't quite understand that one.
Yeah, no, that's true. The Texas boys make sense. So yeah, I don't know. And there's something to it. Would hate to fade Scotty. I'd be interested to see if, again, it's just something that people look past, because Palmer, when you look at kind of the rest of the groups up there, isn't necessarily the same caliber as some of those guys that are in that same price tier. But again, Scotty is playing so well right now that maybe it makes enough sense to just continue to hammer him, especially if he is anything that resembles under-owned.
Well, you could also make the case that 9,700 for Scotty is the cheapest we're going to get him for the next 6 months.
For sure.
The fact that Ryan Palmer has single-handedly depressed his salary, and they are not one of the 4 teams priced over 10K. So maybe that alone is a good reason, even though Palmer, they could be brought down and cheaper under 10K, because Palmer's recent performance in his last 5 events, especially if we exclude Austin TPC, like Palmer has performed miserably. So it could just single-handedly drag the team down altogether. I'm not sure if I'm going to play Scheffler. It really will depend, or Palmer. It's really just going to depend on what the field does. So we have to give it another 48 hours to find out. I do like the pin hunters in Straka and Sig, though. Just the fact that Straka earning a T9 at the Players, finished 1 shot out of the playoff with Jordan Spieth last week. And remember, he could have laid up for par on 18. Instead, he took that 150-yard approach shot and went pin hunting, and instead sent it left and ended up bogeying, which is the only reason he fell out from 13 under with Spieth 1 at. So, like, Straka will go for it. So that gives me confidence that we are finding birdie hunters and rostering one of them. But the one that stands out to me that I want to talk about, what are your thoughts on McDowell and Power? Because even though they've also been pretty poor of late, McDowell still has top 25 finishes and 3 straight performances in this tourney. And I do think they're going to be significantly rostered personally. So your thoughts on that team?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so I feel like they're in a spot where the teams above and below them are going to be more popular. So I don't hate the team theoretically, especially if it ends up being, the ownership that I think, but if it is going to be in ownership, I'm not really interested at all. Graham McDowell's not played really well much of late. Had a nice weekend at RBC Heritage. That's a course where at this point in his career, he can contend because it's, distance is not rewarded. It is just kind of a, less than driver course accuracy. And then if he can get anything from the putter, then he's going to be okay. That's kind of what we saw. But otherwise, leading into it, it hasn't been much. But like, I think Keegan Bradley and Brandon Steele are very similar games. They are basically, a lead off the tee. They can get really hot on approach. Neither of them can putt. But if, again, they get anything close to field average here, they are very much in contention. Good friends of similar age, play a lot of practice rounds together. You like that. They're, very familiar with each other's game. And then just above them is the Sanjay Im and Benny Ann group, where Im has been playing terrific. Ball striking at the Masters was great. Last week could not putt at the RBC Heritage, but ball striking was, I think, gained 10 strokes tee to green. And then Benyan and top 2 last week on the Corn Ferry Tour, 1 back in February. He's trending in the right direction to get back onto the tour, but he comes back without a doubt with this win. These two will be focused. Obviously, there's the Korean angle there too. So yeah, I mean, that's a team that I think is going to be garnering a lot of ownership, and rightfully so. I think that they are in form too, and I like that quite a bit at 8,700.
You think they're going to be garnering more than Zalatoris and Davis Riley? Because I have Zalatoris and Davis Riley pretty high right now.
I think that's. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the top 3. To be honest, I mean, we all love Zalatoris. It's very similar to Scotty in a sense, where you're getting, Zalatoris exposure for less than what you typically would on a given week, right? He typically is going to be in the mid 9s or something like that. Davis Riley is volatile, but Davis Riley is a nice pedigree birdie maker. I think he's still top like 25 on the tour in birdies. Can putt it, in a spot where maybe we don't have to have Willie Z make every putt is not a bad place to be either. So yeah, I mean, I think that they're going to garner a ton of ownership. Again, they came up together. They're friends from from college days. They didn't go to the same schools, Alabama and Wake Forest, but they've been playing on the amateur circuit for years together and have a good relationship. Those are the things I want to lean into this week.
So we talked a lot about this range and the teams we like, but I hate when DF shows do that and don't leave you with leans and make assertive opinions, since it is our job to do that. So I'm going to ask you your top 3 teams in this range, and I'll start while you think on it, because factoring in everything, ownership, salary, what it allows me the rest to do, knowing I want to have a zip code in this range and basically live here to avoid the 10K and the lower range, then my top 3 that I know I'll be playing for sure are Sergio and Fleetwood. It's already tough. Straka and Sig, and Lowry and Poulter, keeping in mind that I'm watching Scheffler and Palmer's ownership, that you can make the case Scheffler at 9,700 is Cooper Cup at 9K, where we should probably just take advantage of and go over the field with it. So those are my 3 favorites in this range from 8 to 10K.
Yeah, I like all those too. Without having the advantage of ownership projections at this point, I would go with Neiman and Mito Pereira, Zalatoris, Davis Riley, and Sanjay and Benny Ann.
Great. 6 different groups. We did not settle anything at all. The lower tier, though, is where I struggle, because remember, like half of the world's top 10 is playing at this course. 23 of the world's top 50 are here as well. Thus, I personally only have one team that stands at under 7K. And then I got a few strong teams under 8K. For instance, Keith Mitchell and Brant Snedeker played together here last year, I think is strong. Joseph Bramlett and Matt McNeely, I think everyone believes is strong. I also have an outright ticket on very early this week, put it in on them. And then, of course, Brian Stewart and Russell Knock at 7,500, if only because you could practically guarantee in rostering one of them that a majority of your second shots in DFS will always come from the fairway. Just the most accurate team in this entire field. And so those are the 3 that stand out the most. What about you with anything under 8K?
Yeah, the one team just at 8K that I think is interesting are the Canadians with Adam Hadwin and Adam Svensson. I think that they are very interesting too. Be interested to see if they are not owned. Again, just the form of Hadwin has been tremendous. Svensson is another guy that can get going with approach. So if they can putt at all, they should be interesting too. This is an interesting range though, for sure. I'm with you, Matt McNeely and Joseph Bramlett. I think that they are the best of the bunch. Probably comes with some ownership. Matt McNeely, I think, is, a guy that I've always, early in his career, and this is a young guy, profiled for shorter courses, smaller greens, again, Pebble Beach style, because that's what we know him to be, fond of, grew up on. But like Bramlett can hammer the ball. He is massive off the tee. Doesn't do really anything else well, but apparently these two live together during quarantine. We found out today that they like their girlfriends hang out together. They're very close. So I felt to me like probably a random matchup, but apparently these guys are buddies. They ate a lot of ice cream, apparently, their words, during COVID together. So there's some relationship there that adds to it for me. Again, we're looking for any sort of thin narrative that we can grab onto this week. Just a little bit above them or same price, Doug Gim and Matthias Schwab. Like this probably feels like a pairing that was forced together, but I don't mind this. Schwab's been playing pretty good golf. Gim has not really played great, but does historically play fairly well on Pete Dye tracks. If there's something to that, if there's any sort of putting action with Gim, I think that they're very interesting. I think that they're kind of a natural pivot if Mav and Bramlett get kind of out of control. A little further down, Matthew Neesmith and Taylor Moore have some upside. Again, if we can get some birdies there from Taylor Moore, that'd be interesting. They're going to find some fairways from Neesmith too. And then I wish there was anything that was good from Steven Yeager, because I kind of like the spot for Joel Damon. I think he's playing pretty well, and I think this is kind of a nice fit for him too.
Below 7K, Wawrinski and Peter Uihlein stand out the most to me. They obviously reprised their partnership from last year after coming in top 4 in this event. Have the driving distance at what we mentioned earlier was a lengthy course as well. But that's literally all I slided when I go below 7K. Again, even for a field of 160 golfers, like no one stands out beyond that. It gets too cute, even though in builds right now, although we know Bramlett, McNeely, and Stewart and Knox will definitely carry some ownership, I think you can fit 3 of the teams we talked about, and then go up and still have room for at least one team slightly under 10K. Maybe that's Scheffler and Palmer, but that's the way I kind of look at lineups right now and getting 3 of these that I'm confident in. What about you?
Yeah, so I think you make a great point, because I think what's going to happen is if you decide that you need to get up into the 10K range, or especially if you decide you want to click a 10K guy and a 9K guy, you're coming down here into the 6K range, and you better have like those 2 teams that you picked at the top, better both top 5, because you're leaving yourself wide open to some stuff down here that just does not have any upside. It's kind of the nature of the event, right? With 160 guys and the way that these teams are paired, it just does not set itself up well for a lot of these teams. And when you kind of look at who's won here since they've gone to this format too, and you really haven't had these like long down the board darts. These, bottom 7K, 6K, DK guys have not really been. You've seen them in the mix, like you mentioned with Uihlein and Wawrinski. And that's probably the only team that I am kind of comfortable even clicking down here. But that's probably going to be the same for everybody. There's just not a lot down here that you feel good with. I'd much rather differentiate in the mid-tier where we've talked about we couldn't agree on guys in the 8K range. I'd rather play the ownership game in that range versus like trying to get cute with like the winners up top and forcing myself down into the 6s. So from like just a game theory and from a roster construction build, that is definitely going to be the way. Stay out of the 6s. Find guys that I like that are leaning to be low owned into that range that I'm comfortable with. Even the upper 7s, we mentioned a bunch of guys in the 8 range. That definitely would be the way I'm building this week.
Any other thoughts on below 8K or in general building lineups before we move on? Because again, like we said, it's a thin week. Not many people are going to play. It's for the degenerates only. So that's literally all I have on this tournament.
Yeah, that's it, man. I really think avoid the 6s. Don't get cute. There's just such little upside down there for you to actually be able to compete and, lean into, again, something we try not to do here. Lean into narratives. Look for guys that you think have some sort of relationships. They will play together. Look for any of those things that you can. Finding, I think, I can go both ways. I can be convinced that guys that similar to like the Keegan and Steele pairings where they have a very similar game. So they're not going to be caught off guard with like where they're going to be left in the fairway or things like that. That's kind of where their game is. But I also think of the complementary piece like you touched on at the top with, Poulter and Lowry. Like I think you can kind of build with those 2 ways. I can be convinced that either or makes a lot of sense, but I would look for those things that, can kind of be paired well together this week. So either very, very similar skill set, or guys that have a great one thing that they do well, kind of like Joseph Bramlett, who can absolutely hammer it. And if someone else can do the heavy lifting, same thing with like Zalatoris and Riley, someone can do the heavy lifting there, and that one guy's skill sets, can run hot with the putter, can do some of the, carry him a little bit more than you typically would. That's kind of how I would, kind of structure my player pool this week.
Leave the people with your favorite outright bet of the Zurich Classic.
Man, the top of the board is too short. It's a bummer, because I would love to get something a little bit closer to 20 on Burns and Horschel, but it's like 12, which is ridiculous. Well, just from a number standpoint, Bramlett and McNeely should not be 75-1. They're 75 on DraftKings, or they were earlier today. That's ridiculous. But I like the young Chilean team. I like Mito and Neiman. I think that they are both in great form. Both have games that really fit any build, and that's kind of what we get here in Louisiana. So I'm going to go with the Chileans.
You mentioned Hadwin and Svensson, and I talked about Mitchell and Snedeker, who are only 100 less on DraftKings, but it's because I totally forgot to write Hadwin and Svensson down at 8K. So just know, not only am I on board with that team, I guess this will be my play. I'm rostering them in single entry, and I already have a first-round leader ticket on them. I'm waiting.
Nice.
Ron Kloss's first-round leader column, which everyone should read, for showdown content as well at betspertsgolf.com, but I already do have an early round ticket on them. So that's a team I'm definitely looking forward to watching, and we'll be playing along with the others I gave strong leans on. So with that, what else do you have coming out this week?
Betting article coming out probably later this evening. That's it. Going to be a light card for me this week. I typically spend the majority of my funds weekly on finishing positions, and I'm just not this week. There are just too many variables. I'm going to took a bunch of shots on outrights. I have one first round leader bet as well. It is on HV3 and Bubba, because of the ability for them to maybe, take some shots with the best ball format on Thursday. I think that they can go low, and again, we get a little bit nervous when they're going to go alternate shots. So they're not necessarily an outright play, but first round leader. But that's it. We're ramp up, continue to, we got some good stuff coming, Daigle. We got some good stuff. I think you've seen some of that today too. Some of the tools that are coming on the back end. I'm excited for the folks to see a lot of hard work going in. So I'm excited about where we're trending.
We are not settling on the projections and queries we have right now. We are going even deeper. Just know it's absolutely coming. And there's not a better week to hold off and force it to next week like the Zurich Classic. So it works out well. Until then, remember, Klos's and Noonan's betting cards are also coming on Wednesday. DFS values will be up Wednesday morning, as well as prize pick selections. And then we will get into showdown content as well. So it'll all still be up there by the time you check Tuesday night and Wednesday afternoon at betspertsgolf.com, as well as our free best bet. So until then, next week, Mexico, enjoy DFS for the Wild Zurich Classic. Good luck this week.